Make way for Mr. Speaker.
I invite the member for Kelowna Mission to lead the House in prayer or reflection.
Holy God, I thank you for being here today. And it feels like we just need you more than ever. Please give us justice and show us where we have moved into judgment. Please give us hope and turn us from despair. Please give us unity where we have chosen division. Please give us truth when we have chosen to believe lies. Please give us healing where we have been broken. And today, please heal our Premier. Restore his body so that he is able to serve you and thus our province in all he is called to do. Amen.
Introductions by members. Madam Clerk.
Introduction of bills. Private members' time.
Member for Chilliwack Kent.
Good morning, Honourable Speaker. Thank you. I think that perhaps one of the most misleading ideas about feminism and gender equality is that if you can look around and see more women, we must be achieving it. Take this chamber, for example. There are more female members than ever before. If you can count an equal-ish number, that must mean equity and equality, right? That, to me, is a most dangerous notion. A notion that, if taken without any critical examination, could have us ignoring many gender-related inequities that put us all, men and women, at risk. One of these inequities, perhaps one of the riskiest in my opinion, is gendered health. We all know that our healthcare system access is for everyone. When we talk about health, it doesn't matter your gender. Access is open to everyone, but access to what? Healthcare is based on a very long and old tradition of predominantly men studying in predominantly male discipline, doing research about and on predominantly male bodies. for the purposes of keeping society healthy. And traditionally, society has had a very narrow definition. Spoiler alert, it's men. Now, we have moved past this. We have brilliant people in STEAM working in medicine and research and treatment, and it's different today. We have men and women engaged in the work required to have the science, required to do the science and be representative, accessible, and relevant to all genders. But we can't ignore the hangover of our history. We know that all genders can experience access issues and health, and it is critical to not lose sight of this. Today, I would like to discuss about gendered health for women. Let me give you an example, a very simple example. Take the heart attack. We all know the signs and symptoms, right? I think I learned them in grade 6 or 7, probably while doing jump rope for heart. I think many of us may have. The symptoms of a heart attack are squeezing chest pressure or pain, jaw, neck, or back pain, nausea or vomiting, shortness of breath. But it is a fact that women die every year of heart attacks because these are actually the symptoms of a heart attack for men. According to the Heart and Stroke Foundation of Canada, for women, symptoms are chest pain, but not always, pain or pressure in the lower chest or upper abdomen, sweating, jaw, neck, or upper back pain, nausea or vomiting, shortness of breath, fainting, indigestion, and extreme fatigue. Some symptoms are the same or similar, but many are unique. So unique, in fact, that most women have not heard of these symptoms being associated with heart attacks and so brush them off. Last night, when I shared this with my partner, he was surprised and said he had no idea. This wasn't a shock, but his next point was, how do I know how to help you that you even need my help if I don't know this? It's not just women who need to understand and know the signs and symptoms, but those around them who love and care for them, employers, friends, all of us. How do we take care of each other if we only know the signs for approximately half of us? That's just one example of how research and education can be gendered and can impact health outcomes in women's bodies. Women's bodies are often smaller, with smaller hearts and arteries, and there are specific risks that we know impact women's health. Risk factors like pregnancy, menopause, and hormonal changes that impact every system in the body and can result in drastic changes, as well as gender-related factors such as lower socioeconomic status, gender-related violence, and the reality that there are still many arenas in our society where women's experiences are just not believed. We also know that many of these risk factors are exacerbated for our trans brothers and sisters and for racialized women. So there are some very real risks to gendered health, and there are also some very real costs, both individual and social. Social costs are both more difficult to initially recognize and dramatically more costly and risky to our province. One very big example is the cost of caregiving. Women continue to overwhelmingly provide most of the care. In our personal lives, women continue to leave, adjust, or limit their participation in the community and economy in order to carry the weight of caring for our babies, our children, aging parents, sick partners, or family. Even before the pandemic, 30% of women in BC support people who have long-term illnesses, disabilities, who are aging, and racking up an estimated total of 6 million collective unpaid caregiving hours per week. Professionally, women continue to make up a huge majority of care aides, community support workers, residential support workers, nurses, long-term care, healthcare workers, childcare providers, mental health workers, nutritional and cleaning support professionals, and education staff. These positions require a massive amount of emotional labor, which I would argue is essential, but often unpaid, and traditionally, they're largely precarious positions or underpaid. The BC Women's Health Foundation has indicated in their Unmasking Gender Inequity report that historically, girls and young women have been encouraged into occupations with high levels of flexibility under the assumption that they will eventually be the primary caregivers of children and other family members. According to the report published by the Foundation, the concentration of employment in these sectors led to women in BC losing 60% more jobs than men, as women occupy jobs in industries that were the first to be impacted by job loss or restrictions, that those jobs were impacted to a greater extent and for a longer period. The same report found that the gendered nature of work put women at higher risk of exposure to and infection from COVID-19 in BC. Women having access to health care that is relevant and inclusive to them is more than just a moral or social responsibility. As the report highlighted, children, families, and communities need healthy women. Essential services need healthy women. Organizations and the economy need healthy women. And if there are still any who need more reason, making changes that support women staying healthy has the potential to save up to $2.6 billion in lost worker productivity annually in BC, and as much as $17.9 billion across Canada. Thank you.
Thank you, member. Recognizing the member for Surrey South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the member for raising this issue. It's certainly one that we can agree on. I'm pleased to speak today about gendering health. Over the last 2 years during the global pandemic, all British Columbians have come to realize the importance of our medical system and equal access to it. People from across BC, especially those underserved by access to medical care, were impacted. Deficiencies, though, in our medical system are not new. And especially as we're talking about today, there are significant gender biases that impact women. Women's health research has been chronically deficient in the past. I experienced this myself when I was first injured 30 years ago and looking for information about various impacts of spinal cord injury on women. There was very little information available on the women's experience. Furthermore, the determinants of health are complex, and they arise from a combination of interacting economic, social, psychological, and biological forces. But with a lack of research into women's health, the medical system has sexism built into it at the very foundation. Take, for example, as the member said, heart attacks. The typical symptoms that most people attribute to heart attack are more likely symptoms for men, leaving women more likely to have severe side effects or die because symptoms are different. Women in general aren't as aware of them and aren't taken seriously. This is just one very deadly side effect of the quiet sexism that interferes and influences medical care. If we want to see long-term change in health outcomes for women, it has to include the society-wide impacts. The Vancouver Women's Health Research Network did publish a report, and obviously both the member and I have read it, Gendering Health Determinants Framework, Why Women and Girls' Health Matters, which highlighted the need for a long-term approach, not only for women generally, but especially for vulnerable groups. For this to happen, an equitable distribution of resources is crucial, and it could be achieved with greater gender equality in paid and unpaid work, social rights like parental leave, public childcare and elder care, and ethnoculturally appropriate care aimed at Aboriginal, visible minority, immigrant, and refugee communities. We know that rural and unreserved Aboriginal women were particularly likely to find themselves without equal access to health care and therefore not reaching out for health care and experiencing worse health outcomes. And when we talk about trans health, those issues are also important. In British Columbia, no one can be denied medical care whether they identify as trans or cisgender. But this is critical, but unfortunately, it doesn't prevent discrimination in the healthcare system. There is still a lot more to be done. Groups like Trans Health BC, the Catherine White Holman Wellness Centre, and Trans Pulse are just some of the organizations helping to ensure the delivery of services for transgender people. But patients aren't the only ones impacted by gender. Those who work in the medical field are as well. And in any given workplace, research has shown that 51% of women, compared to 31% of men, report experiencing workplace discrimination. That same study found women physicians were 5 times more likely than their male colleagues to experience opposition to career advancement, 3 times more likely to experience actions they perceived to be disrespectful in the workplace. And it's interesting that this topic came up today because just over the weekend I was speaking with a woman whose sister-in-law is a doctor who has experienced that very kind of discrimination. Not only have female physicians reported feeling their career has been impacted by their gender, but there's also an issue where 30% of women in Canada report having experienced sexual harassment in the workplace. When women don't feel safe or equal in the workplace, that leads to significant mental health issues, burnout, and individuals less likely to remain in the system. At a time where there are significant shortages of medical staff, including family doctors and nurses, it's more important than ever that we ensure that everyone, no matter how they identify, feel appreciated, valued, and most importantly, safe, working and seeking help in our medical system. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member. And of course, just a reminder to everybody, please wear your mask over your nose and your mouth in order to follow the public health orders. Member for Chilliwack, Kent.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've given examples of social costs of ignoring gender health, but there's also individual costs. Beyond the pink tax that many of us have heard of on everyday goods and services, there are very real individual health-related costs to being female. There's period poverty, birth control, time off related to reproductive health issues. There's a cost to lives and quality of lives in the reality that often women's pain is dismissed as anxiety or not believed or recognized as a physical ailment. This costs us. Ineffective testing that is not designed for our bodies or is not effective for us costs us. Late detection, not knowing the signs and symptoms in women, lack of research, lack of diagnostics cost us. Lack of choice, depression, anxiety, fear of losing our jobs, self-medication, ignoring symptoms as we care for others instead, all of this costs us. There's so much work to do, and I'm so grateful to all the healthcare professionals, advocates, and researchers of every gender who continue to call out for change, who continue to publish and ask for awareness and policy that supports health, which recognizes the range of gendered needs and differences. This is especially true when it comes to supports, treatments, procedures, coverage, access, research, and education. And I thank those who recognize that women's health is impacted by many different areas. I'm also proud to be part of a team that is committed to listening and doing the work and has already started it. There's so much yet to do to fix a system that has been built over a long, long history. But we've begun by committing to make health more affordable for women, by addressing period poverty, giving easier access to medical abortion, and addressing the cost of contraception, by providing publicly funded, gender-affirming lower surgeries in BC, by recognizing gender-related risks in BC's mental health roadmap and investing in specific mental health supports for women. We have a Parliamentary Secretary for Gender Equity who recognizes that gender-based violence is not just a justice issue, but a health issue, and we must work on best practices for accessing health care following an assault. We know that gender-based violence impacts women's health and comes at an individual and social cost that was exacerbated by the social and economic impacts and restrictions of COVID-19. And we have put supports and resources in place to help those for whom home is not safe. Together, we can move past the confines of old definitions, habits, and assumptions, and advance equality and build a brighter future for women, girls, and gender-diverse people in British Columbia. We need everyone of all genders to become leaders in healthcare across BC. One last note, if you have delayed your tests during COVID, your routine mammogram or your PAP, maybe because you were busy or nervous or because you were taking care of others, it's time to rebook. You are your strongest advocate, and you cannot care for others if you do not care for yourself. Make the appointment. Thank you.
Thank you, Member. Recognizing the member for Peace River South.
Well, thank you, Chair. And, you know, it's interesting listening to the last commentary, and I'm going to build on that because one of the things I think we can all agree upon is there's not much more important in life than our health and our family members' health. But obviously right now in the province of British Columbia, we're almost in a crisis mode in so many areas. And this is not just because of COVID. It's exacerbated the issue. But when we look at the state of healthcare and healthcare professionals, the shortage thereof around the province, and the hospital emergency room closures that have had to take place because of that, I think it warrants a very healthy discussion in this House and action from all of us. Maybe I should start by thanking all of our nurses, doctors, healthcare staff around the province. When we look at the stress, the workload that they've been under the last couple of years, it can't be easy for anybody. But it definitely has been, I think, at the front lines, just that much more of a challenge when people who we trust our well-being to, are tasked to the limit when we look at the shortages that we have. And so I think we all want to thank all of our healthcare professionals for the extraordinary work that they've done the last couple of years specifically. But I think through COVID, one thing that has happened is it's really highlighted and acknowledged the cracks that we have in our system and the need for greater investment, need for greater support and attention that's needed, especially for our healthcare workers. Right now across the province, in almost every jurisdiction, we're seeing a serious shortage in staffing in our hospitals and in our clinics and many emergency rooms. I think, unfortunately, some of us in this house know are chronically understaffed. That's leading to increased stress on our workers. More people are leaving because of burnout. Some are choosing to retire because of this extra stress. And that's only, again, exacerbating the staffing issue that we have, which is just compounding and making it harder for those that are staying in the system, looking out for our health and our well-being. And again, it's in every corner of the province. I look at our northern hospitals, the dedicated healthcare professionals that we have in Northern Health and in my region specifically, I can attest to that. And the fact that they have been dealing with such a staff shortage, and this is for years. This is for quite a few years now. COVID-19 definitely has made it worse. We've seen the impacts of that, but again, it's highlighted the struggles, the troubles that we already have. Our understaffed hospitals around the province are leading to closures, shifts being closed, hospitals being closed, patients in need being diverted to other areas, and in a lot of cases being diverted to hospitals that they themselves are understaffed or over capacity. This summer in Dawson Creek, for instance, we had to bring in a virtual doctor service to help cover the fact that we did not have night shift doctors in our hospital. And even with that extra help that came in, it still wasn't enough. And our hospital on numerous occasions in Dawson Creek, which is the hub hospital for the region that I represent, had to close, had to not accept patients into the ER and divert people away. I look at Chetwynd, that's also in my riding. This is almost a daily occurrence that I see a notification coming out from Northern Health saying due to staff shortages and the pressure in the hospital because of the amount of people who are utilizing the ER or the healthcare system in the hospital has had to go on diversion. That is causing a huge ripple effect in regions like ours, but I also say that puts pressure on every single person in this house when we have to transport people out of a region to other parts of the region, other parts of the province. And although we appreciate that help and that support, people would far rather have the healthcare that they need as close to home as possible. When we have the hospitals that are right there, the issue is we need the staff. Fort St. John, beautiful, fairly new hospital in that. June 2020, right at the onset, I guess, of the pandemic, the ICU in Fort St. John, another major hospital for the northeast part of the province, had to shut down due to staffing shortages. And people being transported. Imagine that. You're in a large geographical area of the province. All of the hospitals are being shut down due to staffing issues, and people are having to be transported. To actually be told when you need to go to the emergency room, sorry, the doors are closed. We actually have that happen where people show up and there is a sign on the hospital door, sorry, we don't have room for you, we don't have staff. And the next closest major hospital is a 4-hour drive away through the Rocky Mountains to Prince George, who is also struggling with the same issues. I think it's important that we just highlight that we have a lot of work to do. The Fort St. John Hospital, again, requires 20 nurses in the ER. They only have 5. There are 15 vacancies right now, which is why they have to go on diversion, just like so many other hospitals around the province. So I think, again, I know I'll have a few more minutes just to wrap up at the end of this, but I think it just really highlights the struggles that we need to, in this House, collectively work on and address, because this is the health and the well-being of our constituents, the people we represent, and we need to find a solution to make sure that they have the supports they need when they need it. Thank you.
Thank you, Member. Recognizing the member for Langley East.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. Absolutely, every British Columbian, no matter where they live and whatever their health concerns, should have access to the care they need when they need it. So I'd like to thank Member Opposite for bringing this forward. The pandemic has shone an even brighter light on the importance of health services, and in Budget 2021, our government continued to protect people's health and safety with $4 billion in new investments over 3 years, including launching our primary health care strategy, which focuses on faster team-based care, hiring more than 660 new full-time equivalent health professionals who will be part of 22 primary care networks throughout the province. In establishing primary care networks across 65% of BC's communities since that strategy was started. Government has invested over $1 billion over 3 years to improve care for seniors, which includes investments in primary care, home health, long-term care, and assisted living. We've opened urgent primary care centres, and these centres provide primary care to patients who do not currently have a family doctor or nurse practitioner, and weekend and after-hours care, taking pressure off hospital emergency departments. A total of 16 of these urgent primary care centres are now up and running across the province. We've included community health centres, and these health centres bring together health and broader social services to improve access to health promotion, preventative care, and ongoing services. We've dramatically boosted the number of MRI exams and elective surgeries as part of the surgical and diagnostic imaging strategy, and increased the number of priority surgeries and diagnostic imaging like PET scans and CTs to ensure faster access. Increasing staffing levels in long-term care homes, taking action, lowering drug costs by making record investments in fair pharmacare, and moving forward with a first-of-its-kind children's complex care transition facility in BC to fill in those gaps in much-needed services. So, Honourable Speaker, as I said earlier, every person deserves to have the best possible health care close to home. And one of the things that our government is focused on is boosting support and hiring to enhance services in Northern Health. So people living in Northern BC are benefiting from additional government action to deliver needed healthcare services. And the government announced $6.38 million for programs to retain and recruit more healthcare workers. And by making the Northern area a desirable and accessible place for health professionals to live and work. Our government's been working with Northern Health regarding concerns on recruitment and retention of healthcare workers in the North, and to address these, actions are being taken at every level in Northern Health, starting immediately with the launch of a comprehensive healthcare worker rural retention program. And the program is designed to offer financial incentives and support for healthcare workers, and is funded by the Ministry of Health at approximately $3 million. Funding of $821,000 to continue the travel resource program, keeping more than 40 registered nurses and licensed practical nurses in the area. $225,000 in funding to develop a childcare program to support expanded new net childcare spots and expanded hours of operation to meet the needs of healthcare workers who often work 12-hour shifts. $750,000 to develop a housing program in communities where suitable market housing is a barrier to permanent staffing, and $825,000 to launch the Rural Doctor in Aid virtual support pathway. These new programs will help retain and recruit more healthcare workers to provide needed services. And our government knew that the way to fix healthcare was delivered. The way that healthcare is delivered had to change. And we're working to fix those problems and ensure that those left behind are now brought into the net and transforming the way it's delivered. So not just for people in the community, but for everyone around the province through these strategies. My colleagues and I know that there's more to do, and we're committed to delivering the health care services that families in BC count on. And I'm very excited to have been able to stand here today, Honourable Speaker, and talk about the investments and the pathway forward that will ensure that every British Columbian has access to the health care needed in a system that unfortunately had previously been systemically underfunded, and our government's worked so hard over the last several years to reinvest to ensure that there's equitable access throughout the province. Thank you, Honourable Speaker.
Thank you, Member. Member for Peace River South.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to get back to the topic, which was supposed to be around emergency room closures and some of the challenges that we are facing around the province of British Columbia. I guess the politest thing I can say, that the member can stand off and read off a whole bunch of things that were written for, but at the end of the day, what's happening is hospitals around the province are being closed. We do not have enough staff in the hospitals right now. We need to collectively work on a plan. It's not just about training and recruiting, it's also about retaining. One of the biggest issues that we have, that we hear right now in our healthcare profession, is retaining the healthcare workers when they do come. And again, I can speak from experience for the rural parts of British Columbia. It is difficult to recruit people to rural BC. That is just a fact that we need to work on, and we need to have strategies around that. But again, what compounds the issue is the additional stress that they are faced with when they move to smaller communities where hospitals are being shut down, ERs are being closed, and the healthcare professionals are being burnt out. And so what happens? They in turn maybe leave. Retaining them is difficult, and we need to work on that collectively. St. John Hospital in Vanderhoof is sounding the alarm, and they're in a lot of trouble. ERs being closed this year in Ashcroft Hospital, Dr. Helmicken Memorial Hospital in Clearwater, Barrier Health Centre, all their emergency rooms were closed this year in part-time due to staff shortages. Royal Inland Hospital in Kamloops, luckily, is able to take some, but they are being stretched to the limit as well. And this is not just a rural issue. I think everybody in the House has heard the breaking point that the Surrey Memorial Hospital is under, the fastest growing community in the province, and they don't have the systems in place for the people that they have as well. And so we need to be working on that. And again, this is about making sure that we come together with a plan. This is not about just announcing projects and money, because that doesn't solve the problem unless we know it's going to where it is needed. We need to have plans in place. I am very thankful that we have a nursing program now at Northern Lights College in Fort St. John, which is going to hopefully help the Peace region. There is some light at the end of the tunnel. If we can train local, they stay local. But we do need to collectively work on this. We need to talk about the stresses. We have to talk about emergency rooms that are being closed around the province due to lack of staff, and need to find a plan to fix this issue. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Member. Recognizing the member for Parksville-Qualicum.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Over the past few generations, we have seen our relationship with food change dramatically. Many of our children have never experienced the unexpected sweetness of biting into peas straight from a pod or freshly picked carrots, and many of their parents no longer know the family farmers who grow this food. In the 1950s here on Vancouver Island, we produced 85% of the food that we ate. But today, us islanders produce less than 10% of what we consume. Our food comes to us from farther away, geographically of course, but also much of it is processed well beyond recognition, and it comes to us through more intermediaries than ever before. Early in the pandemic, we saw just how precarious our food system is. Disruptions in the global supply chains and massive volatility in price led to, for the first time in a long time, the conversation of food security being heard at dinner tables across our province. Add to this struggle the impacts of climate change that farmers are already experiencing in a significant way. Not just the heavy winter rains and storms and the longer dry spells each summer, but the heat dome that we all felt recently had a massive impact on our agriculture sector. Here in BC, over 500,000 chickens perished from the heat. In many areas, berry crops suffered 50% or complete crop failures, and millions of dollars in damages were felt across the sector, including shellfish and aquaculture operations. The vital link between our economic prosperity and food security is now more than ever clear to us all. And it is because we know the importance of a strong and secure agricultural and food sector that our government has focused heavily on food security and sustainability initiatives since we were first elected. We are ensuring that we will have a resilient and competitive agriculture and food sector in this province that feeds both British Columbians and the world, both for now and for generations to come. This will be crucial not only for ensuring food security, but also lasting prosperity and jobs, especially as we work towards an economic recovery following COVID-19. What gives me hope, Mr. Speaker, is seeing how our government's focus on food security initiatives are being amplified by the interest and demand of regular British Columbians. Our farmers' markets were hit hard by the provincial health restrictions of the pandemic. In Parksville Qualicum, our local market, led by Lonnie Elves, every week adapted their market plan to keep their vendors and patrons safe, and they worked incredibly hard to ensure as much local product as possible made its way to the tables of families across our community. And here and across our province, people lined up to buy local produce and support community farms. We are also seeing more families sign up for CSA boxes, community-supported agriculture. When you sign up for a CSA, you commit to paying a local farm the same amount weekly throughout the growing season, and they deliver a bounty of fresh vegetables, meat, and/or eggs at the peak of their growing season. We're seeing positive signs as local demand for BC food is growing, as the market for value-added products does as well. We are also seeing investments in local companies as the number of new businesses and made-in-BC products continue to grow. This is especially evident through our BC Food Hub network, which is creating more demand for ingredients from local farmers and helping increase the volume of food grown and processed locally. These hubs are providing good jobs, economic opportunity for many businesses, as well as farmers, ranchers, and fishers in 12 communities across the province, increasing food processing capacity and strengthening regional food security. Our government is also focused on 3 key initiatives. Grow BC, which works to get more farmland into production, to date bringing more than 6,000 acres of farmland into the capable hands of new farmers. Feed BC, which is increasing BC grown and processed foods in meals served in our hospitals and post-secondary institutions. And Buy BC, which makes it easier for consumers to identify the products with a Buy BC label so British Columbians can enjoy the healthy and local food while also supporting our local community and economy. What we eat not only sustains us, but it is also a reflection of who we are. And we are a strong, resilient, and community-focused people. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member. Recognizing the member for Delta South.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. It's a pleasure to rise today to speak about my favourite topic, agriculture, with a particular focus on local offerings as well as food security. As the COVID-19 pandemic has unfolded, we are starting to deal with its full impact and the long-reaching effects it will have on our economy. Farmers have experienced unprecedented labour shortages, disruptions in package processing and transportation sectors, as well as increasing domestic and international market uncertainty. Over the past 19 months, farmers have had to make difficult decisions about which crops to grow and whether or not to leave certain fields fallow for a season. Moving forward, it's imperative that the government work with the federal counterparts and industry partners to restabilize our province's agriculture industry by strengthening our risk management and agri-recovery programs. It's been said many times, but it bears repeating. BC's agriculture industry must become more self-sufficient. As the old proverb goes, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. We need to better be prepared for unexpected interruptions in the international food supply chain, as COVID-19 has made us realize how reliant we are on meat, fruit, and vegetable imports from other countries. We must continue to incentivize both buying and growing BC products. These are just a few of the many unresolved issues that we as legislators can tackle to help ease some of the worry and financial struggle facing our agricultural community. Just last week, Mr. Speaker, we welcomed agriculture representatives from all across the province of BC for BC Ag Days at the Legislature. Many of us got the opportunity to meet virtually with farmers, ranchers, and stakeholders to hear about the issues that matter to them. One of the big takeaways was the need to review previous tax recommendations along with water licensing, labour shortages, and the trespass issues. What the Council wants to see is an update to the provincial farm and ranch taxation legislation with a goal to improve incentives offered to active farmers and to increase farmland productivity. Honourable Speaker, over the past few years, I've reminded this House many times about the growing costs that farmers and ranchers are having to contend with. The hike to the minimum wage and carbon tax, the introduction of the employer health tax, and the financial losses that came with the government's Bill 52 disrupted building plans and put principal and secondary houses on hold. And I will note that hardship could have been avoided had they been consulted about the proposed changes in advance in the first place. Another issue highlighted this past week by the BC Agriculture Council is the need to remind the buying public there is much value in both large-scale and small-scale farms. The Council notes that a lot of conversations around agriculture today are influenced by a perception that the products grown or raised on smaller-scale operations are a better choice than those offered by bigger farms. The Council reminds us that there is a market and a need for both types of farms and many, many opportunities for greater collaboration and working together. Honourable Speaker, as a third-generation dairy farmer myself, I can tell you that for the vast majority of farmers and ranchers, we share the same values. We care about the safety of the products we grow, the safety and care of the animals we raise, and the care and adequate housing for our workers. We go above and beyond to offer safe, high-quality products to customers, and we understand the importance of making connections with those buyers who come to our properties, to our homes, and to our farms. We believe in environmental protection and in putting in place practices to ensure the next generation can follow in our footsteps. And perhaps the most importantly, we know long-term profitability. As I'm fond of saying, there is no farmland without the farmer. If governments continually put up barriers and make it harder for farmers and ranchers to do their jobs and actually make a living, they will disappear, and so will the farmland that they once tilled. And that would be devastating to food security in this province with a significant issue, and it's part of the reason I introduced the Home-Based Craft Food Act in 2020. It would have allowed individuals to sell food products that have been prepared in their home kitchens as long as they have the appropriate food safe certification and local business license. This bill would have been a step forward towards our goals of food security, while also providing more opportunity for British Columbians to enjoy high-quality homemade food straight from local farms. So, Mr. Speaker, so that just one idea that could help in this regard, and I hope all sides of the House will continue discussing creative ways to support local agriculture by lessening the regulatory burden and red tape for farmers and improving food security in British Columbia. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member. Member for Parksville-Qualicum.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the member for Delta South for your continued advocacy for the farmers of our communities and for your collaborative effort as we look to become more resilient in the future of British Columbia. I would be remiss if I did not use the balance of my time here, Mr. Speaker, to celebrate a few of the hardworking family farms in Parksville-Qualicum. Every morning on the way to my office, I have the absolute pleasure of taking in the beautiful sights of Hillier's Estate Blueberry Farm, crowned with the stunning backdrop of Mount Arrowsmith in the distance. This family farm was established by the Bergen family in 2006, but like many farms, it is the continuation of a legacy on this land dating back generations. With over 150 acres of blueberries, they supply families all over Western Canada with some of the finest blueberries available on the market. Morningstar Farm in Parksville founded 20 years ago by Clark and Nancy Gourlay, has flourished into a thriving dairy and cheese works. The farm is open 7 days a week, where visitors can come and see up close the herd of 45 cows, the automated milking parlor, and the highlight for many is Canada's first on-tap milk vending machine, where for a small sum you can bring your own bottles and fill it with milk fresh from the cows. This family farm was very recently found new caretakers with Albert Gorder and Chelsea Enns, bringing with them an experience and passion for dairy farming. And Springford Farms, founded by Colin and Diane Springford, together they brought generations of family farming experience to our community. In 1979, they started on a 10-acre hobby farm in Parksville, moved to a 30-acre farm in 1990, and in 1998, they moved to their present 225-acre site in Nanoose Bay. They not only produce some of the finest eggs and beef that can be found in central Vancouver Island, but through their market store, they have enthusiastically helped countless small local producers sell their products. The recent passing of Clark Gourlay and Colin Springford had a massive impact on the people of my community. They will be missed, but their legacy lives on. These are but three of the hard-working family farms that help form the backbone of our community. To all of the farmers in our province, I thank you and your families. Through the early mornings, the long days, and the hard work, you do more than just feed us. It is with your collaborative, neighborly spirit that you help bring our communities closer together. And through the nurturing of your land for future generations, you give us hope for tomorrow. For all this and all that you do, I thank you.
Thank you. Just before we move to the next statement, I just wanted to caution the members that, of course, the subject matter of the statement pertains to a bill that is currently before the House. And pursuant to Standing Order 25.5C, we've obviously got to take care that we don't anticipate deliberations that the House or one of its committees may undertake. And I'm sure the member is well aware of that. So I'll acknowledge the member for West Vancouver, Sea to Sky.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and as always, I appreciate your guidance. Mr. Speaker, the pandemic has shown us that this is a critical time in our province's history where people need and deserve accurate information from their government, now more than ever. People need to have access to the information that will allow them to make educated and informed decisions. Decisions that help ensure their health and safety and the safety of those around them. Decisions that give them confidence in this democratic institution. Decisions that can influence the fundamental direction of our democracy. It is our democratic duty to provide citizens with the appropriate information that allows them to understand the issues that we face as a society. At a time when British Columbians are looking for greater access to information, greater transparency, and greater accountability, it is imperative governments protect people's access to open information. Transparent governance allows for information to flow freely so that citizens understand the underpinnings of decisions that are being made that can affect their lives. Transparency is fundamental in ensuring good governance, something that we should all be striving for. Openness and transparency are key pillars that allow democracy to work, and without these important aspects, accountability and trust cannot be formed. Mr. Speaker, I think we all understand that knowledge is power. When openness and transparency is threatened, access to knowledge is imperiled, the power of the people in a democracy is weakened, and thus democracy itself is undermined. We in this House need to stand together in defense of this institution, in defense of freedom to access public information, and in defense of the principles on which this democracy rests. A key tool to open information is freedom of information process. And a key tenet of that principle is that the information belongs to the public and therefore should be accessible to the public. Without freedom of information, we would not be able to ensure government is making the right decisions that are in the best interest of our citizens. Rather, government could ensure that decisions are made to better their positions of power. And these decisions don't come to light as such, and individuals within government can potentially do as they please without oversight. Our current freedom of information laws are a safeguard against this. Oppositions of government, the media, and the community at large are free to request this information at no charge, as this is the people's information.
It seems to me, member, that I've listened to debates on Bill 22, including your own, and it seems that we're starting to traverse into topics of legislation. We do have a bill, a committee, where arguments such as the member may wish to make can make those arguments, and that would seem to be the appropriate place under our standing orders.
Just stating facts, Mr. Speaker, just stating facts.
Please don't argue with the Speaker, member. There are standing orders that we as a House have agreed to follow, and those include orders that discuss where appropriate debate is to be had. The member has made his debate around freedom of information legislation. There is a committee looking into those matters right now, and so if the member wishes to continue debating the legislation, the appropriate place would be that committee, not here under the private member's statements as stated in our standing orders. So if there's a different track to take on the discussion of accessible information, I invite the member to try and find it. However, if it's discussion, legislation, and our laws, the rules are very clear.
Mr. Speaker, this is about democracy and the process for openness and transparency, which we strive to ensure accountability and trust is created between government and those they govern. It allows for democracy to work, and it demands that individuals are able to participate effectively in decision-making and assess the performance of their government. Freedom of information contributes to enhanced empowerment and equality of all social groups, including women, Indigenous people, and the disadvantaged. It also plays an important role in creating well-functioning markets and ensuring governments make the right improvements as our world continues to change. Improvements in investment climates and improvements in government policy. We don't have to look very far, Mr. Speaker. We don't have to look back very far to see examples of how freedom of information has allowed us to better understand what government is doing. Time and time again, we've seen information come to light that highlights the importance of this process. It's only through freedom of information that we've learned about unfulfilled commitments on housing targets, through unfulfilled commitments on childcare targets, and the details or lack of details on the Massey Tunnel replacement project. Or more concerning, government's plan to use or initiative to use taxpayer dollars to politicize constituency offices, or examples of ministers' improper use of messaging services to communicate with political staff. Mr. Speaker, freedom of information process holds governments accountable and keeps them honest. It ensures the public has access to vital public data that helps the public better understand if government is making the right choices for all our communities and citizenry. It's a process that's critical. In a world where this process is hindered and barriers are in place.
Thank you, member.
It's important that this is not hindered.
Again, I'd ask members to reflect on the standing orders. I didn't write them, but they are orders that we all agreed to follow. And so if there are suggestions for changes, please suggest them, but let's try and follow them until those suggestions and changes are made. Recognizing the member for Maple Ridge Mission.
Well, thank you very much, Honourable Speaker, and I did want to thank the member from West Van Sea to Sky for bringing up a statement in regards to the importance of accessing government information. And as we know, members, that in 1993, the Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act was brought in to hold current, future governments accountable to the people who trust them to make decisions on their behalf and to act with integrity. And the last round of amendments to this were in 2011, which was 10 years ago.
I probably should have cut this off at the beginning. I just don't know how we can talk about freedom of information when we have a Freedom of Information Act open before us in this House for amendments and debate. That is the appropriate venue. And so I know we can go down the history, and I apologize to the member.
If I may just move on, then?
Okay, please.
Thank you. So where I was going, Honourable Speaker, was that I can't speak to the bill. That's what my next statement was going to be, was that I can't speak to the bill. So what I will do is speak about the importance of freedom for information generally. And so freedom of information is important to fight corruption. Freedom of information is important to ensure that elected governments are held accountable and are transparent with the decision-making that they're making. Freedom of information is important to expose any fraud or mismanagement. Freedom of information allows people to make informed decisions, Honourable Speaker, when electing representatives. In short, freedom of information is important to democracy. And over the last decade, there are a number of examples, for example, Honourable Speaker, where freedom of information was important to these very things that I'm talking about. For example, in 2012, there was the BC Health researcher firing scandal that happened, Honourable Speaker. And in that story, there was a lot of things that happened: whistleblowing, dismissals, lawsuits, settlements, restatements, apologies, and of course, a very tragic suicide. But there was one piece that illustrates the importance of freedom of information, Honourable Speaker, and that is that there was an ongoing RCMP investigation at that time that went from 2012 to 2014. And in 2014, in July, the RCMP, Honourable Speaker, closed its files to the investigation, and at that point, the Vancouver Sun made a freedom of information request. And that nearly a year after that, it was revealed that the police were never given evidence by the government to investigate, Honourable Speaker, the wrongdoing that was used to justify the firings, despite that government at that time telling the public that investigation was ongoing. And at that time, the then health critics said they claimed an RCMP investigation simply didn't exist. They failed to provide any information, even though they led their press conference announcing the dismissal of these workers, saying there was an ongoing RCMP investigation. It shows a government that, frankly, intentionally, from the beginning, misled the public about this issue and continued to do so for years, Honourable Speaker. This is an example of exactly the kind of information that freedom of information is done in order that the public can then make an informed decision about when they go to the polls, when they choose their representatives, Honourable Speaker, that they can make an informed decision. Another example of freedom of information and the principles around freedom of information was also brought forward in 2015, Honourable Speaker. And this was around a scathing report from the then Privacy Commissioner in regard to destruction of email records that related to missing women on the Highway of Tears. And this resulted from an investigation after the former executive assistant to the Minister of Transportation wrote the Commissioner a letter stating that he was ordered by other staffers to triple delete records responsive to a freedom of information request. The Commissioner investigated and found that the Minister did indeed contravene the Freedom of Information Act in ways that threatened the integrity of access to information in British Columbia. And the Commissioner then said it's difficult to overstate the seriousness of the problem my office discovered. Again, Honourable Speaker, while no charges were laid for the deletions, and now of course, information of unrecoverable Highway to Tears records, the public, Honourable Speaker, was made aware of serious issues. So, moving on, basically, over the last 4 years, Honourable Speaker, there's been a number of actions that have been taken to allow the public to have more access to information. One of those, Honourable Speaker, is the increase of data and proactively publishing documents. So, Honourable Speaker, I've run out of time. There's so much to talk about, but I very much appreciate the opportunity to speak to the very important access to freedom of information. Thank you.
West Vancouver, Sea to Sky.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the member, not necessarily opposite, but down the road anyway here. I suggested before that we really don't have to look back far to see how freedom of information has allowed us to explore how governments operate. But equally important is to understand what type of personal information is collected on the public. Ever since Cambridge Analytica scandal was exposed in the UK, people have become more aware of how their data is collected, who has access to it, how it is used, and to what ends. And Mr. Speaker, rightly so. We know that seemingly mundane data is extremely valuable to third parties, to companies, to advertisers, to political campaigns, or even bad actors, wherever they happen to be. Likes, dislikes, views on various social issues, views on hot-button political issues, page views, and preferences. If enough of this basic data is gathered about somebody, it can be extremely powerful for a third party, regardless of who that third party is. Intentions can be innocuous, but increasingly can be insidious, and in some cases can even be with criminal intent. Until now, certainly the rules here in British Columbia have been largely, the government has largely been restricted from gathering this type of data, and for good reason. In the wrong hands, this type of information can be used against someone to target them without them knowing it. Currently, even when it is deemed permissible to collect this information of this nature, it is done under the purview and oversight of the Independent Privacy Commissioner of British Columbia. It's important, Mr. Speaker, that there are checks and balances in place to prevent governments from using this type of information for their own self-interested ends, to create strategies to target citizens and sectors with design, to purposefully manipulate narratives with self-serving purposes. Thresholds on limits to this type of information that would routinely be captured by advertising companies, political campaigns, and bad actors should remain high, Mr. Speaker. And if this is to change, if there's initiatives to change this, then the citizens of British Columbia should be justified and concerned and demanding to know why.
Thank you, Member. Government House Leader.
Honourable Speaker, I ask that the House consider proceeding with motion number 18, standing in the name of the member for Boundary-Similkameen.
Thank you. Members, unanimous consent of this House is required to proceed to motion 18 without disturbing the priorities of the motion preceding it on the order paper. If any member is opposed to the request for leave, please indicate now. Leave has been granted. Boundary-Similkameen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Be it resolved that this House supports strong rural communities built on thriving, diversified, and sustainable rural economies. A few years ago, sitting around a campfire near Pemberton, my friend Ben made the astute observation that what our small communities needed most is the ability to reach their full potential. The historic model of economic development and the foundations of neoclassical economics is that more is better. But today I rise to remind us that better is actually better, and that as people tasked with making life better for British Columbians, all of us in this chamber owe some attention to how best we can help support rural communities live up to their full potential. We need to do this in the context of significant transformation in rural BC. The nature of our resource sector is changing. There's dramatic increase in the mobility of labor. Climate change is impacting everything we do. And even fundamental expectations and values of our new generations are different than in years past. For example, over the last few decades, we've seen job losses and mill closures in the forest sector, which leaves our communities struggling to revitalize those downtown coffee shops and kindergarten classes, which is the impetus for the sweeping changes proposed in our forestry modernization intentions paper, for example, to help provide more value to more British Columbians. And even while this pandemic has tried relentlessly to break our spirits, there has been an increased appreciation of the quality of life that rural communities can afford. We've seen a shift to increased remote work opportunities and increased digital engagement options in education and beyond. This resulted in migration into rural communities, people deciding to live where they want to and fitting their work into those places as opposed to vice versa. This means more vibrant communities as long as we plan wisely for these changes. We're also coming to a greater societal recognition that climate action is not an altruistic or optional path forward. It is a responsible investment in public safety. The opportunity here is to reimagine how rural communities identify as active actors in this process. How well we incorporate climate solutions into our identity in rural communities will dictate our success. This motion is to support that transformation that's on the horizon, and the fascinating question for me is how. Communities are all unique and have different needs and different pressure points for change. Given that one size clearly does not fit all, this government's support plan needs to and does provide a diverse menu of programs to get the right support to the right places. There are some fundamentals of making life more secure that we know are foundational. Childcare is a necessary part of the scaffolding to support thriving rural communities. Karamias, for example, loses rural professionals after recruitment because they simply cannot find childcare. So investments in childcare partnerships like this government is making in an unprecedented fashion across BC are investments in healthcare, investments in jobs, economic vibrancy, and more. Another cornerstone of thriving rural communities is connectivity. It's tough to work remotely without predictable and high-speed internet. Budget 2021 brought stable funding to connectivity for the first time to help realize the government commitment to connecting all British Columbian communities. A bold proposition, but one that we all recognize is central to helping provide the potential for communities to be creative, to be diverse, and to support a shift in the nature of what rural BC's identity really is. Agriculture is part of the fabric of rural BC, as we heard earlier. Helping build predictability into producers' financial statements, programs like Feed BC and food hubs are important to ensure that local producers have sustainable avenues to get their healthy food processed and into institutions like hospitals and universities. This builds predictability and security into our agricultural systems. To help pivot minds, the Stronger BC Future Leaders Program is providing over 5,000 people with access to skills training, internships, job co-ops, and meaningful jobs. Hopefully we find inspiration from rural innovators such as Boundary Electric in my riding, which among other things converts sea cans into mobile cryptocurrency mining centers, eventually equipped with generators attached to convert waste gas into energy on site. We are foresters and miners, but we have an identity in rural BC that can be so much more as well if we embrace it and support it wisely. And how do we support best rural communities to plan for and prepare for this future that we have yet to see? How do we help ensure that rural residents keep a strong sense of purpose and identity in this new future? I'm not certain, but I see it as our #1 challenge for us in this House to work to ensure that we can provide diverse supports for a diverse and sustainable, thriving BC. On Friday, I met with leaders in Okanagan Falls, an unincorporated community with huge potential and an enormous amount of local energy poised to make great things happen. If we do this right here, our role in this House will help lower barriers and provide supports to help make rural community visions such as theirs a reality. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member. Carabel Chilcotin, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the member opposite for moving this motion this morning. It is an issue that I'm sure you know is one of great importance to many people on my side of this House and certainly many people of British Columbia. I have to say I'm glad to hear the member opposite talk about the importance of strengthening rural communities and, of course, our economies, particularly when so many people in BC, certainly rural BC, feel utterly forgotten and left behind by some of the government's decisions. It is not lost on my constituents or people around BC that this NDP government is mainly composed of MLAs from Metro Vancouver and Victoria, and therefore, much of its focus lies in southwestern BC. But as it has been rightly pointed out, strengthening our rural communities is absolutely vital and something that needs to be a greater priority for this government. So I welcome the opportunity to highlight this motion. One need that is prominent in my constituency, but also in much of rural BC, is connectivity. And this is true both in cases of internet and cell coverage, but also with respect to transportation. Especially in the past 2 years, as so much of our daily life has increasingly moved online, our need for better connection to the internet is becoming more and more profound. Improving this will open up so many new opportunities and access services that are currently limited. But additionally, to improve overall connectivity, we need better transportation services. The lack of transportation between communities and even within our cities and towns holds people back from being able to access health care, businesses, and other services, and sometimes, Mr. Speaker, even their work. The withdrawal of Greyhound from BC left considerable gaps in our transportation system, and while private companies have done an amazing job of filling some of these gaps, and they could be used by the government to solve some of these large transportation issues that still plague rural BC. And it's not just the need for alternate routes of transportation, it's also the state of our roads that can be a limitation to connectivity. We frequently have roads that have been washed out by landslides and floods, and these events can block off the only routes in and out of communities. There is significant need for better maintenance of these routes, both to limit the safety risk and so that people do not have to worry about being cut off from businesses or services like healthcare. Also, in order to strengthen our rural communities, we need proper supports for recovery from disasters like wildfires. It is absolutely unacceptable that months and sometimes years after devastating fires, people are still trying to pick up the pieces by themselves because government, Mr. Speaker, this government has not stepped in to provide the needed investment in recovery. I've spoken at length before about the NDP dragging their feet on securing disaster relief funding from the federal government and the impacts that this is having on ranchers looking to get their cattle back on the range. But there is so much more to do. So much work that is absolutely necessary to maintain and strengthen our rural economies. It's hard to forget, Mr. Speaker, that this government, despite their attempts to make it seem like they are ready to invest in rural communities, is the same government that cancelled the Rural Dividend Fund. The Rural Dividend Fund consisted of millions of dollars set aside precisely for what we're talking about this morning, creating thriving and diversified rural economies. Instead of investing in the program and allowing it to continue to fund important projects, the government called it a slush fund and then rated it to use the money elsewhere. It was profoundly disappointing for so many people, particularly local governments, who were depending on this money for projects in their communities. I am glad that the members opposite are finally starting to acknowledge the need for greater investment in the interior and the north, but I hope that they know they have a lot of work to do. Rural BC deserves better. Mr. Speaker, it deserves far better from this government than what it's received over the past 4 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Member. North Island, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I stand today to support the motion. Be it resolved that this House supports strong rural communities built on thriving, diversified, sustainable rural economies. Mr. Speaker, the most important part of that statement to me is the identification of rural economies and the understanding that they differ from urban or metropolitan economies. Rural and remote communities should not just be defined as a location on a map or a population statistic. They're communities that have deep historic roots, cultures of resilience, and the people who live there most often are from multi-generational families who identify themselves directly with their community. It will not come as a huge surprise that my riding, North Island, is primarily made up of a dynamic group of rural, remote, and Indigenous communities. Currently, we're seeing these communities raise concerns as we watch historic economic sectors attempt to transition. Industries like commercial fishing, forestry, mining, tourism, and aquaculture are looking at sustainability and diversification strategies that are creating a sense of risk or uncertainty and for any type of economic investment. Coupled with the absence of tools that urban and metropolitan communities often take for granted, makes it more important than ever to listen to the needs identified by the people in these communities as we assist them with their economic diversification. A great example of this is the Connected Coast project. This project started with a strategic direction from rural and remote directors of the Strathcona Regional District in hopes to promote safety and provide accessibility to government services like telehealth, distance education, emergency management BC, and to assist with attracting economic opportunity. This project grew out of necessity and has become what is today a collaboration between the Strathcona Regional District and City West, a BC telecommunications company founded by the City of Prince Rupert. I was extremely proud, Mr. Speaker, to welcome the Minister of Citizen Services and the Minister of Social Development and Poverty Reduction to Campbell River just last Friday to announce the launch of the cable-laying vessel for the Connected Coast backbone fibre. Our government has identified that approximately 60% of rural and non-urban Indigenous communities do not have reliable, affordable, high-speed internet, and that people need broadband to work, learn, and stay in touch with friends and loved ones. That's why I'm so grateful for programs like Connecting British Columbia that help fund a significant portion of this infrastructure cost, and our Stronger BC plan that includes record investments in connectivity infrastructure for rural and Indigenous communities. Budget 2021 brought stable funding to connectivity for the first time, Mr. Speaker, ensuring that these important investments continue. And when provincial, federal, and privately funded projects are complete, 60% of rural and Indigenous communities throughout BC will have access to reliable, high-speed internet. Almost $90 million has been committed to connectivity projects throughout BC since October 2020, Mr. Speaker. The Connected Coast is bringing unprecedented digital capacity to many rural and remote coastal communities in BC. The subsea fibre optic cable will be laid along the ocean floor, providing the infrastructure to benefit approximately 139 communities, including 48 Indigenous communities, from the southern tip of Vancouver Island to as far north as Haida Gwaii. But that's not all, Mr. Speaker. We're investing in rural and remote BC with small and medium business recovery grants, circuit breaker relief grants, and wage growth strategies through the Ministry of Jobs, Economic Recovery and Innovation. Buy BC, Feed BC, BC Food Hub, and the BC Salmon Restoration and Innovation Fund through the Ministry of Agriculture. New regional airport infrastructure, active transportation initiatives, and road upgrade projects through the Ministry of Transportation Infrastructure, and rural community resource grants and exploration around mass timber opportunities from the Minister of Forest Lands, Natural Resource Operations and Rural Development. Mr. Speaker, we are working hard, but there's still more to do. We need to continue to provide rural and remote communities with the tools they need to diversify their economies: cell service, reliable hydro, travelable roads, and municipal infrastructure. Rural and remote BC is quickly showing itself to be the ideal place for people seeking lifestyle and affordable choices for themselves and their families. So it's more important than ever that we get these communities tooled up so they can make investments, create jobs, and provide services, all while keeping their community identities, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, Member. Caribou North, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It truly is my honour to rise today to speak to the motion of supporting strong rural communities. Investments in rural British Columbia form the foundation for future growth, economic certainty, and opportunity across this province. They assist rural communities remain vibrant, attractive places to live, work, and of course, encourage young adults to stay and attract new residents into our communities. And government needs to invest in these communities to ensure that the next generation can flourish in the very communities that they call home. This requires a rural economic development strategy that aligns with government policy and a wide range of programs. Governments need to be there to support these communities, to support communities when they're facing forest-dependent communities, facing mill closures, curtailments. Government needs to be there to support communities facing wildfires, floods, landslides. Government needs to be there. And I encourage members of this House to look at the BC Liberal, the BC Rural Opportunity Strategy, which the cornerstone, of course, was the Rural Dividend Fund. Don't abandon policies that made good common sense, that supported rural economic development. Building infrastructure such as highways is critical to rural communities, which of course link them to the rest of the province and the key markets to help them thrive. At the same time, it's essential for government to continue to do road repairs on impacted communities that have faced catastrophic climate events such as wildfires and floods. Because, of course, transportation serves a dual purpose by generating direct employment and underpinning job creation while all supporting the quality of life for citizens in our communities. It's also critical that government supports policies that support thriving rural economies. And we all know that small businesses are the heart and soul in all of our communities. And it is critically important that we are there to assist them in times of difficulty. We need to do more to create vibrant places for people to live, work, and play. And one of the ways is to make sure that we're supporting the very small businesses that give back each and every time that community members ask. I have heard firsthand, Mr. Speaker, the many challenges that businesses in my riding of Cariboo North are currently facing. Things such as they're having difficulty accessing labor. They're struggling with the increasing in taxes, and they're, of course, still dealing with the devastating impacts of the pandemic. This government needs to do more to support this important sector in order for our communities to live up to their full potential. Helping rural communities meet local infrastructure needs such as affordable housing, transportation, infrastructure, and replacing aging infrastructure can enhance safety, grow our economy, and support trade for BC's expanding resource sectors. Last week in this House, we recognized the importance of our agricultural sector in our province. Food security in our province requires that we listen closely to this important sector and ensure that government policies and regulations do not have negative consequences. However, I have heard major concerns from a variety of my agricultural constituents that this government continues to create roadblocks for this sector. Issues such as confusion around requiring permits, delays in receiving water well licenses, and layering of new fees has caused disruption for many and is greatly impacting our agricultural sector. For example, I've heard from individuals that future farm planning has become so difficult for the next generation, it's not sure if the next generation is willing to step up or can even survive this critically important sector. For many, the water well license programs have taken years to process, and most importantly, the new fees on top of the rising cost of layering of cumulative fees are negatively impacting a sector that needs to thrive for BC to meet its food security needs. I want all members of this House to understand the unique challenges our rural ridings experience. Cariboo North is larger than Vancouver Island, and I want each of you to consider for a moment what it means when government policies and regulations, the role it plays in making rural communities less efficient. Under this government, communities like mine have struggled, and we need to implement the right policies here in Victoria to ensure that our rural communities can thrive. One of my proudest accomplishments when we were in government, when we developed a pilot project across ministries looking at how we can support rural communities. I implore this House to continue that important work. Thank you.
Thank you. Member North Coast, please.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. It's important to note that the wealth generated in the regions of rural BC make possible many of the essential public services that every British Columbian depends on. Our government has been working hard to support rural BC, including the communities I represent in North Coast. These investments help maintain diversified and sustainable economies, allowing communities to thrive. Locally, some of the investments to rural economies include the Northern Planning and Capital Grant, which brought in over $175 million to Northwest communities. Communities like Prince Rupert received over $14 million to invest in water infrastructure, roads, or downtown revitalization. To put that into perspective, the city's budget is $35 million annually, so that's quite an investment. Thanks to federal and provincial investments, Highway 16 from Prince Rupert to Prince George will soon have cellular coverage along the entire route, fulfilling a critical recommendation to make the highway safer. As part of this project, Rogers plans to install 12 cellular towers along the highway. This will provide 252 kilometers of new highway cellular coverage, closing several gaps along the corridor. As someone who uses this highway regularly and has been stranded on the highway myself, I know how important this project is for the people who travel Highway 16. Not only will this project open up access to communities along the corridor, it will make it much easier for emergency responders to react quickly when people need assistance, and it's scheduled to be complete in the fall of 2022. People in northern British Columbia will continue to enjoy safe, reliable transportation options with help from new multi-year funding from the provincial and federal governments. BC and Canada are providing $7.9 million in Safe Restart funding to respond to the longer-term impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic and the continued need for public transportation in rural and remote communities in northern BC through to March 2025. The new funding will enable northern bus services, including the areas served by BC Bus North, to be sustained and enhanced. In 2018, when Greyhound eliminated its bus services throughout Western Canada, the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure, working in partnership with BC Transit, launched BC Bus North, a long-haul bus service serving communities such as Prince Rupert, Prince George, Valemont, Fort Nelson, and points in between. People who live and work in northern BC are benefiting from a provincial investment of $25 million that will improve and expand operations at the Port of Prince Rupert. This supports BC and Canadian exporters' competitiveness and opportunities in international trade. Our investment in the Port of Prince Rupert improves Western trade corridors and helps Canadian importers and exporters get goods to market. It supports regional businesses and provides the necessary infrastructure to boost our provincial economy to help build back stronger from the hit of COVID-19. The project, led by the Prince Rupert Port Authority, improves and expands infrastructure at Ridley Island Export's logistic platform. The new platform will increase the port's export transloading capacity from 75,000 20-foot equivalent units, or TEUs, to over 400,000 TEUs annually. Subsea fiber optic cable will be laid along the ocean floor, providing the infrastructure to benefit approximately 139 communities, including 48 Indigenous communities. The Connected Coast Network will serve communities with backbone infrastructure from Haida Gwaii to southern Vancouver Island. Service providers will be able to offer high-speed internet that will provide coastal communities with better opportunities to learn, do business, access services, and stay connected. It's a powerful socioeconomic driver that supports the delivery of accessible and responsive services citizens count on. My colleague from North Island has done an excellent job outlining the benefits of this project. Honourable Speaker, I'm running out of time to elaborate on the investments we've made in northern communities, such as the creation of 45 new childcare spaces at School District 52, or the $720,000 input into the Prince Rupert Regional Airport to help sustain services. We have accomplished much in the north, but of course we still have much more work to do. It is my honour to represent and advocate for the people of North Coast and to help develop strong, resilient, diversified rural economies. Thank you.
Thank you, Member. Kelowna West, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure to rise in the House today and to support the motion before us today and speak to the need to strengthen our rural communities and economies. Our rural communities are vital and unfortunately all too often forgotten by this government. I have to say that it was surprising to see the NDP put forward this motion. However, the member who brought it forward, I know he lives in rural British Columbia and one of the communities that needs many things, as it feels like the priorities for the government often lay outside of rural BC. However, it is a positive step to see them recognizing the importance of these communities here in this House, and I hope it signals a change in the way that we operate and the way that we engage with the majority of the province that is beyond hope. But as for strengthening rural communities, there is no shortage of important issues to talk about. The one that remains at the top of the list, I think, in everyone's mind is connectivity. And I know that we continue to hear that, and I know how rapidly it's changing. But that change really took place during COVID when people were stranded at home, couldn't connect with their businesses, their loved ones. This has been a growing issue with the threshold and the standards that the federal government has insisted that connectivity levels get to across Canada. And I'm glad to hear from the member in Boundary Similkameen about the continued investments in this, but I do think that we need long-term sustainable funding. As I mentioned, the CRTC has recently set a target that every Canadian should have access to internet with a speed of 50 megabits per second, but right now only 40% of rural British Columbia communities have access to this, and it's even worse in our Indigenous community that are at less than 38%. The internet is so essential for most people's daily life, from business, school, healthcare, consulting a doctor, or being able to just stay in touch with loved ones and friends. As such, there needs to be a greater focus in ensuring that every home in BC has access to this kind of connectivity. In the same vein, there's still many places in this province, and I'm glad to hear the member from North Coast mention the fact that there's going to be cellular coverage along Highway 16. That's great, but there's still many places besides Highway 16 that need to have access to that. We have to invest in this. That transportation, that connectivity is as important as our highways. For people that live in the Lower Mainland, it's hard for them to imagine living somewhere that cell coverage isn't always a guarantee. But right now, that's just a part of life for so many British Columbians. It's not just cell coverage. There are so many challenges for rural communities that people in urban areas never have to think about and don't really understand. There's less access to education, particularly at the post-secondary level, and for those that are in rural BC having to or wanting to attend college or university usually means leaving your community. Rural BC also has fewer options for healthcare. Hospitals are few and far between in much of the province. Ambulance wait times can be exceptionally long, or you simply don't have access at all. This makes having a family doctor all the more important. Hence, I go back to my earlier comment about connectivity and health access over the internet. So the rest of the province, we're seeing that people more than ever without a primary care provider, and so this is one of the ways of helping make that more accessible. What about transportation? It's not only a challenge to traverse long distances between cities, but the transportation options or lack thereof within many of our communities pose a challenge. Many cities and towns do not have the transit infrastructure to adequately serve our residents, particularly in places even in my riding of Kelowna West, where areas like Northwest Side has no access, and school students ride for up to an hour and a half just to get to school one way every day. We need to ensure that we are investing our communities in ways that make common sense and serve the needs right now for as long or for into the long future. Whether it's recovering from wildfires, improving connectivity and transportation options, or providing more supports for businesses, there's certainly no shortages of ways that this government could work to strengthen rural communities and their economies. The problem is not a lack of opportunities to invest, but a lack of will and effort to prioritize the needs of rural British Columbians. Whether someone lives in the centre of Vancouver, rural Peace River, and in my constituency of Kelowna West, they deserve the same access to services, the same level of government support. I hope that the members on the opposite side of this House can come to not just agree with that statement, but actively work to make it a reality. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member. Vancouver Falls Creek, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Most of us are well familiar with the rural to urban brain drain. For decades, rural towns have been losing inhabitants to bigger cities. Between 1951 and 2016, BC's urban population grew from 68% of the total population to 86%. Many of those workers joined the tech sector, now employing more than 135,000 individuals. With both wages and employment growth well above average, a career in technology has never been more inviting. Projections show that we expect a shortage of 75,000 workers in the sector by 2030. That's not very far off the horizon. The global pandemic has had horrific consequences for many. It's also been a disruptor, both in supply chain, but also in how we do business. As has been widely reported, working from home allowed British Columbians a new framework from which to plan where to live. Why pay high urban prices when you can work from anywhere that you can get internet? And of course, this government continues to seriously invest in connectivity in rural BC and Indigenous communities. Much has been written about the future of work, but in reality, it's still being invented. We don't really know what comes next. Innovation and disruption breed change and opportunity. A favorite small-town example is that of Greg Malpass and Traction on Demand. Greg hails from Nelson, and he founded Traction after attending SFU in Burnaby. Malpass has grown Traction from a one-person company to what is now over 1,000 people. He has 7 offices worldwide in Canada, the US, India, and Australia. Interestingly, Malpass reports seeing a steady migration of his team that are moving from major urban centres to smaller communities, where there's more affordability and they can leverage the fact that they can do their work from virtually anywhere. In 2018, the company opened a 10,000 square foot office in Malpass's hometown of Nelson. Traction is looking at many disruptive and new ways to do work, including a model where remote workers have a central location to meet up, like a coffee shop, and Traction pays part of the operating costs to that business. BC has a network of regional economic development agencies working to support companies in these communities. CAST, the Kootenay Association of Science and Technology, collaborates with companies like Traction on Demand. Accelerate Okanagan, or AO, is one of the drivers that's led to the Okanagan becoming a rapidly growing tech and innovation hub. AO indicates that the Okanagan now hosts 12,500 tech workers, a 15% growth, and $1.7 billion in economic impact. One of the companies AO has been working with is Yeti Farms. Creative couple Ashley and Todd Ramsey had been working in the animation sector in Vancouver, and after starting their own company and becoming parents, decided in 2010 to move closer to family in Kelowna. The couple rented space, hired 5 students, and secured their first work-for-hire projects. By 2019, Yeti had 160 artists, 7,000 square feet of studio space. Historically, animating shows under contract for other companies, Yeti has now expanded to the point where they're writing, developing, and pitching their own series. Recently, 3 ideas have been greenlit to develop into primetime pilots. Innovation Island works to support tech companies north of the Malahat. A great example of a studio that benefits from this support and continues to be successful is Cloudhead Games, located in an old fire hall in Qualicum. Cloudhead Games was an early adopter of building video games in virtual reality, or VR, and in fact their hit game, Pistol Whip, won VR Game of the Year in 2020. There's no region in BC where technological innovation is not happening. In the north, tech firms often develop technology specifically for the more traditional northern BC industries like energy, mining, and forestry. As an MLA from Vancouver, I'm always happy to see growth of tech companies in my city. As the Parliamentary Secretary for Technology and Innovation, I see opportunity everywhere. I'm delighted to see the growth of technology and innovation spread throughout our province, creating opportunity for all BCers. And in honor of Women and Girls STEAM Week this week, November 1st to 7th, I'm happy to mention that Yeti Farms, in fact, and Cloudhead Games are both women co-founded and led. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member. Prince George Mackenzie, please.
Good morning. Thank you, Speaker. Well, it's my privilege to stand and speak about the importance of strengthening our rural areas and ensuring that we have a thriving, diversified economy throughout British Columbia. Rural BC can't survive without a strong resource sector. BC can't survive without a strong resource sector across the province. The focus on building a strong and resilient, robust resource economy has never been more critical than it is today. BC's electricity originates in rural BC and is transported through thousands of kilometers of hydro lines across the province. Our natural gas, which is generated in northeast BC, provides heat for most residential buildings in the province, provides natural gas for industry and commerce in British Columbia and the Northwest United States. Those take people, those take a commitment by government to ensure that those resources keep flowing south. Province-wide, resource sector jobs have dropped from 8.4% of all employment to around 4.4%. 50% just in the last few years alone. This is an indication that government has abandoned the resource sector right across the province. 50% of our resource sector jobs have disappeared. I'll start with forestry. The severe overharvesting and bark beetle salvage that we've seen throughout the province has prematurely depleted BC forests. It's led to several mills being permanently shut down, and there's several more to come. Modernization in the forest sector over the last 15 years has seen a 50% drop in employment within the forest sector. I look at Mackenzie as an example, a small town in my riding where the pulp mill has permanently closed, a large dimension sawmill has permanently closed. The other mill in town has been operating intermittently over the past number of years, and combined that's put hundreds of people in this small community out of work. And they've had to go to other areas to seek employment. I haven't once seen government in town to address any of those concerns within that community. They virtually abandoned Mackenzie in its time of need. The time's come to reset how we do forestry right across the province and to enable us to extract the other values of a forest rather than just mere fiber. When I turn to another resource sector, I think that has been abandoned by government, mining. And it's always been the cornerstone of the BC economy as well, contributing to small and large communities. There's several mining opportunities in British Columbia, just in my region alone. Within about a 2 or 3 hour drive of Prince George, there's all kinds of shovel-ready projects that are ready to go. Rare earth minerals are in high demand right around the world. And again, within a 2 or 3 hour drive of Prince George, there's a number of rare earth elements that are attractive to international folks. The problems that we see facing the existing and potential mines are the escalating costs. Many of them posed by government, like your employee health tax and increased fuel costs and lengthy permitting processes. And I look at Mount Milligan near Mackenzie, employs about 450 people, very vital to not only the regional economy in Prince George, but there's people that travel to Mount Milligan from all across the province to work. But as a result of examining these increased costs, the mine life of Mount Milligan has been reduced from 25 years to 9 years. And that's going to have a significant implication on the public and the economy moving forward, not only for the folks in Mackenzie, but regionally all across the province. So there's a number of things, oil refinery, we have petrochemicals, there's a number of initiatives that we need to look at to stimulate the resource sector and the economy of British Columbia so that everybody has the opportunity to succeed and live successfully in our province. Thanks, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member. Recognizing the member for Chilliwack, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm very happy to speak today in full support of the member from Boundary, Similkameen, and Parliamentary Secretary for Rural Development's motion. Be it resolved that this House supports strong rural communities built on thriving, diversified, and sustainable rural economies. My colleagues have mentioned many ways to diversify the rural economy, but I'd like to mention just two: forestry and connectivity. It's not a secret that I worked in the forestry industry, in particular a sawmill, and so the forestry industry is quite important to me. And forestry has been the backbone of our rural communities for so long. I look around the province now, though, Mr. Speaker, and see so many sawmills that have disappeared. Communities all over the province were devastated by these closures. The 2003 Forestry Revitalization Strategy, sorry, Mr. Speaker, truly an Orwellian name, was a disaster for the forest industry here in BC, an unmitigated disaster. It removed the social contract that required forestry companies to process their logs locally wherever possible. But local mills shut down, raw log exports accelerated, and the jobs and wealth from our crown resources went elsewhere. Resources that belong to the people of BC. The current government is taking a different approach. We need to maximize our resources for the people of BC, to have good paying jobs and vibrant communities. That's why this government is supporting things like mass timber by investing an additional $2 million into the mass timber demonstration program to support a second intake for successful, eligible applicants who want to advance their mass timber project. The first intake invested $4.2 million to support 8 mass timber demonstration projects and 4 research projects in the province. This provides grants to accelerate the use of mass timber in BC to support jobs in research, design, engineering, construction, and forestry. Mass timber already provides approximately 166,000 jobs and generates more than $17 billion annually for BC's economy. With these grants, I think that British Columbia has the opportunity to become a world leader in mass timber. Another place that we can ensure that forestry continues to provide good paying jobs to British Columbians for generations is to ensure we are getting the most out of our fibre. In my constituency and my colleagues, the Minister for Vernon Monashie's constituency, there's a company that takes the waste wood or cut ends from larger mills and joins them together to create high-end products, including siding and structural beams. Use pieces as small as 6 inches long, Mr. Speaker. Also in my other friend's constituency, the member from Chilliwack, Kent, there's a new mill that employs up to 100 people and is focused on remanufactured wood. These are the types of activities that we need to continue to support. There's a lot of potential for the value-added sector to keep forestry jobs in our rural communities. I'd also like to talk a little bit about connectivity. I lived in a somewhat rural area called Ryder Lake, just outside of Chilliwack. I had 10 acres. I had some Simmental cows. It's such an idyllic, wonderful place. Lots of old families, properties from 100 to 10 acres. We have the largest western toad migration in southwest BC. They shut down a road as all the tiny little toads, they look like pieces of gravel, cross the road every year. It's a wonderful place to live, Mr. Speaker, but the internet was so awfully slow. So slow. I never got the chance to watch a YouTube video up there. You could either have dial-up or you could have very expensive satellite internet. And so, like I had, many rural and non-urban Indigenous communities don't have reliable or affordable high-speed internet access. Broadband internet is becoming essential for everyone for work, learn, and to stay in touch with friends and loved ones. That's why this government has the Connecting British Columbia program, which helps by funding a significant portion of the infrastructure cost. And Budget 2021 brought stable funding to connectivity for the first time, ensuring these important investments will continue. When current provincial, federal, and privately funded projects are complete, 60% of rural and Indigenous communities throughout BC will have access to reliable, high-speed internet. So, Mr. Speaker, I cannot see my time, but I just want to say, I am proud to speak today in full support of my colleague from Boundary Similkameen's motion. Thank you very much.
So we'll go back to old technology. Before we had the screens with the timers, green light means 2 minutes, face mask off means 10 seconds, right? Fraser Nicola, please.
Face mask off.
Fraser Nicola.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sorry, I didn't hear you. Thank you, Honourable Speaker, and I'm proud to stand today in the House to speak on the motion, be it resolved that this House support strong rural communities built on thriving, diversified and sustainable rural economies. And thank you to the member opposite for bringing this forward, because sometimes when I sit on this side of the House, I think that there is a huge gap between what happens in rural and what happens in urban, and a misunderstanding of without each other, we cannot be strong as a province. What is happening in urban centres makes a difference to what happens in our rural communities, and what is happening in our rural communities makes a difference what happens in urban centres. I know that Highland Valley Copper in my riding, which employs close to 1,100 people, provides good family supporting jobs, has their head office in Vancouver. And many of the head offices in Vancouver, for those resource industries, would gut the downtown of Vancouver if those industries were not supported by government and by the people who live in this province. So I've got prepared notes, but I am quite passionate about the economy of rural British Columbia, and I want to share some stories about my riding. As you know, my riding starts below Hope and goes above 70 Mile, out to Gold Bridge and Braylorn, over to Merritt and towards Princeton, and down Highway number 3 through Manning Park to the U.S. border. So it's quite diverse, but we struggle, as many small communities do. And we depend on governments and people in this House who will support programs that will help small communities get that little bit of a start to look at projects and to look at possibilities in their communities that will build jobs and sustain people staying close to home. I don't know about your communities, but many of our small rural communities are seeing a lifestyle of fly-in, fly-out. People are choosing to live where they live and are having that ability because the job will be elsewhere and you fly out for 2 weeks, come home for 2 weeks. That changes your community. It changes the volunteer base of your community. It changes the interactions in your community. And we need to think about that as leaders. We need to think about the changes that are happening, not just climate change and big changes, but changes socially in our communities that are happening. I think the Rural Dividend Fund was an incredible program for so many of our small communities who wanted to kickstart a project and just needed $10,000 to do that. And I would urge everyone in this House to think about those innovative little projects that got started because someone was able to pick up $5,000 to $10,000 to get it in place. I think about what's happened during COVID. And when we talk about high-tech sector, many people in my community would have no idea what a high-tech industry would look like. But I think COVID has shown us that every place in British Columbia has a right to the infrastructure around internet. Many of us found it impossible to do our Zoom calls, to do our interactions, and you think about that, it's like having no telephone. And many of my communities and areas in my riding don't have a telephone. And so, or don't have telephone connection, cell phone connection. So think about your life without that and how difficult that would be. So lots of things that could be talked about around rural BC and sustainable economies. But I think that one of the things we need to commit to in this House is to understand the diversity of our economy, to understand the importance of everything that happens in this province to every person in this House and also to every person in British Columbia. Without rural BC, urban BC would look very different. And without a strong, sustainable rural BC, I don't know what our province would look like. So I want to thank you for bringing it forward today. And I could talk forever, as you well know, and I know the Speaker's mask is off. So thank you, and thank you for supporting rural British Columbia.
Thank you, member. Recognizing the Nanaimo North Cowichan, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thanks for the warning on the mask, the 10-second rule. We've never had that luxury here. Appreciate it. I'm very pleased to speak in support of the motion from the member for Boundary Similkameen, which is in itself is in support of rural economies. And I'd like to speak to the House from the perspective of a member who represents rural islands. The islands I represent are just a few short kilometers from urban centres. Gabriola, the island that I want to specifically speak about, is only 6 kilometers from Nanaimo, but that can be the equivalent of about a 50 to a 100 kilometer drive given the time of day and ferry service. So it's important that we recognize our communities beyond simple equations, but more deeply. And I think when you look at the Gulf Islands, uniqueness is definitely a trait. Not just the people, but the islands, the culture, the habitat, the uniqueness, and they are governed by a body called the Islands Trust, as well as regional districts. And their mission is to preserve and protect the trust area and the unique amenities and environment for the benefit of residents and the trust area of BC. And it's important that we recognize that it's not just about protecting the environment in the Gulf Islands, but also the unique island culture. It's said that the most endangered species on Gulf Islands may indeed be working families. As the cost of living on the islands becomes higher, the cost of running businesses is higher. So there's always a struggle. And it's important that government recognize just what we're facing, and I think we do. We know that Gabriola is the Isle of the Arts. It's a land of festivals. It has the highest concentration of artists in our province. And so our government recognizes that. And on Gabriola, that's exactly the type of investment we've made, along with others. Recovery funding, just in this past year, Mr. Speaker, noise floor recording studio, $5.5 thousand. Creative writers, $14,500 grants. Micro grant to a singer of $1,500. Project assistance to the museum, the Historical Society was $7,000. Pivot grants were given to Gabriola Arts Council of $35,000, to another 4 artists, $20,000 in total. Stronger BC Resilience grants went to the Gabriola Arts Council again, $18,000, to the Historical and Museum Society, another $18,000. And then again in March to the Arts Council, another $5,000, recognizing how important arts and culture are to the economy and the underlying thriving and health of the Gulf Islands. We went back and gave another $20,000 under the Art Infrastructure Program to the Gabriola Arts Council, and pivot grants again to the Arts Council of another $20,000. The Gabriola Huxley Skate Park project was joint funding, and when I saw skateboard park and funding on Gabriola and saw that it was joint funding, I had to do a double take, but it's joint funding with the federal government, and they got $500,000. The Gabriola Community Hall Association, a $250,000 grant in joint funding from the province and the federal government. It goes on. The Gertie bus service got $188,000 for a new facility to store their bus. The fire department, another $20,000. The accessible playground at the Gabriola Elementary School cost $110,000. And I think the investment that I'm most proud of and has the most immediate effect on the economy and the liberation of the lives of Gabriola residents is childcare funding. There's been $729,000 invested on Gabriola Island alone for a new building and 40 new spaces, as well as the existing spaces, to serve the families of Gabriola. And broader investments like getting rid of the MSP premium, the largest middle-class tax break in the history of this province, as well as the investments in paramedic services. We have 2 helicopters and a fixed-wing airplane on Vancouver Island where we had none and had to wait for service from the mainland in the past. So it's important always to recognize the true economy and the true culture of the places and the people that we are attempting to help in order to do the best job. And I would argue that our government has done that, and that the people of the Gulf Islands, and particularly Gabriola Island, have benefited both economically, culturally, and as families. So I'm very proud of that record, and I'm very proud to stand in support of rural economic development in BC.
Noting the hour, member.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Noting the hour, I would move adjournment of the debate.
Members, you heard the motion. All those in favor indicate aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Government House Leader.
Thank you, Speaker. I move the House to now adjourn.
Members, you heard the motion. All those in favor indicate aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. This House stands adjourned until 1:30 p.m. today.